Timothy James McVeigh spent 6 years on death row, awaiting the end he seemed to crave. But on that April morning in 1995, as the massive truck bomb tore through the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, vaporizing a daycare center and claiming 168 lives, including 19 children, in a heartbeat of fire and rubble, the world reeled in horror. To understand how this quiet kid from upstate New York became America's deadliest homegrown terrorist, we need to rewind to where it all began. Hit that like button and subscribe to be part of our growing community. Also, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from as we dive into this chilling story. Timothy McVeigh entered the world on April 23, 1968, in the small industrial town of Lockport, New York, a place of blue-collar grit near the thundering Niagara Falls. He was the middle child in a modest Irish-American family. His dad, William, a steady but quiet factory worker at a General Motors plant, and his mom, Mildred Mickey, a travel agent who kept the home running but often seemed distant. With an older sister, Patricia, and a younger one, Jennifer, Tim grew up in a working-class suburb of Pendleton, where life revolved around neighborhood games and the hum of nearby factories. It wasn't poverty that marked his early years, no empty cupboards or desperate streets, but a subtle unraveling that started to pull at the threads of his world. As a little kid, Tim was the neighborhood spark, outgoing, playful, always quick with a joke or a scam to make a buck. He'd sell packs of gum to classmates for a quarter apiece, or set up penny pitch games in the basement with old dishes, drawing crowds of kids with his endless energy. Friends remember him as affectionate, the type to hug his godmother during visits and light up family gatherings with his clownish antics. But then at age 10, the family cracked open. His parents' marriage fell apart in a bitter divorce, the kind that left echoes of arguments hanging in the air. Tim blamed his mom for the split and chose to stay with his dad in Pendleton, while she moved to Florida with little Jennifer. Weekends meant shuttling between homes, a routine that chipped away at his easy smile. His father's long shifts at the plant left Tim to fend for himself more often, turning the house into a quiet, lonely place where meals were simple and conversations sparse. School at Starpoint Central became a battleground. Tall and skinny, with a shy streak emerging, Tim turned inward as bullies targeted him for his awkwardness. He escaped into daydreams of revenge, imagining himself striking back against the taunts that stung deeper than bruises. No major fights or crimes marked his record yet, but the isolation grew. He found solace in computers, hacking into early systems like a Defense Department network just to prove he could, earning praise for his smarts. And then there were the guns. His grandfather introduced Lim to firearms during target practice outings, sparking a fascination that went beyond play. By his teens, Tim was stockpiling books on survivalism and the Second Amendment, reading tales of government overreach that fed a quiet paranoia. What if the feds came for their weapons? The thought lingered like a shadow. High school graduation in 1986 brought a glimmer of promise, a partial scholarship to a local business college for his sharp mind. But Tim dropped out after a semester, restless and unmoored, drifting into odd jobs while the divorce's fallout simmered beneath. Those early bullies, the absent mom, the dad's silent endurance, they didn't make him a monster, but they planted seeds of resentment in a boy who craved control. Little did anyone know, as he tinkered with guns in the basement, how those seeds might one day explode into something unthinkable. In the years leading up to April 19, 1995, Timothy James McVeigh's life spiraled into a cauldron of rage and radicalization that would culminate in the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in American history. The Oklahoma City bombing wasn't a sudden snap, but a meticulously planned descent, fueled by a toxic mix of personal grievances and extremist ideologies. The Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, a 9-story federal office complex in downtown Oklahoma City, became the target of his fury, and the 168 lives lost, including 19 children, would bear the tragic weight of his choices. McVeigh's path to the crime began to take shape after his honorable discharge from the Army in 1991. A decorated Gulf War veteran, he'd excelled as a Bradley fighting vehicle gunner, earning a Bronze Star for his precision under pressure. But the military life he loved ended abruptly when he washed out of a Special Forces tryout, crushed by the rejection. Back in civilian life, he drifted, first to his father's home in Pendleton, New York, then to odd jobs as a security guard and gun show hustler across the country. His resentment grew as he saw a government he believed was overreaching, stripping away freedoms. The 1992 Ruby Ridge standoff and the 1993 Waco siege, where federal actions led to civilian deaths, became his obsession. To McVeigh, these were proof of a tyrannical state at war with its people. He devoured the Turner Diaries, a 1978 novel glorifying anti-government violence, including a fictional bombing of a federal building. The book wasn't just a story to him, it was a blueprint. By 1993, McVeigh was living a nomadic life, traveling between gun shows and militia circles, connecting with like-minded men like Terry Nichols, an Army buddy who shared his distrust of the government. The two bonded over their hatred for federal overreach, swapping ideas about explosives and survivalism at Nichols' farm in Decker, Michigan. In September 1994, McVeigh's plan crystallized. He chose the Murrah building for its symbolic weight, a hub of federal agencies like the ATF and DEA, with a glass front that would maximize destruction. He wanted the world to feel his anger. Over the next 7 months, he and Nichols methodically gathered materials. McVeigh scouted the building in December 1994, sketching its layout and noting the daycare center on the second floor. The presence of children didn't deter him. He later called them collateral damage. The timeline tightened in early 1995. McVeigh rented storage units in Kansas under aliases, stockpiling 4,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, a key ingredient for the bomb, purchased from a co-op in McPherson. He mixed it with nitromethane racing fuel, acquired in Texas, and stole blasting caps from a quarry. Nichols helped assemble the components, though McVeigh was the mastermind. By April 14, 1995, McVeigh rented a Ryder truck in Junction City, Kansas, using a fake name. Over the next few days in a remote Kansas field, he and Nichols packed the truck's cargo bay with 13 barrels of explosives, 7,000 pounds of destruction, wired with dual fuses for reliability. McVeigh's plan was precise, but what drove him to this point? Was it Waco's ashes or something deeper, festering since childhood? On April 17th, McVeigh checked into the Dreamland Motel in Junction City, alone, his truck parked nearby. He spent the next day writing letters, including one to his sister Jennifer, hinting at something big coming. On April 18th, he drove the truck to Oklahoma City, parking it overnight in a lot near the Murrah building. The morning of April 19th, 1995, dawned clear and warm. At 8:57 a.m., McVeigh, wearing a t-shirt with the words Sic Semper Tyrannis, thus always to tyrants, lit a 5-minute fuse inside the truck, parked it in a drop-off zone under the building's daycare, and walked away without looking back. At 9:02 a.m., the bomb detonated. The explosion sheared off the building's north face, collapsing floors into a smoldering crater. Glass and steel rained down, shredding offices, a social security branch, and the America's Kids daycare, where toddlers were just starting their day. The blast's shockwaves shattered windows for blocks, and the sound echoed like thunder across the city. The human toll was staggering. Among the 168 dead were 19 children, including 15 in the daycare. Babies like 1-year-old Bailey Allman, whose lifeless body, cradled by a firefighter, became an enduring image of the tragedy. Secretaries like Susan Farrell, federal workers like Mickey Maroney, and visitors like Charles Porter, a grandfather applying for a Social Security card, perished in an instant. Hundreds more were injured, some buried alive under rubble, their screams haunting rescuers for days. The emotional devastation rippled outward. Families shattered, a city stunned, a nation grieving. Survivors like Dana Bradley, trapped under debris, lost limbs and loved ones, their lives forever scarred. What kind of man could walk away from this? McVeigh didn't linger to witness the chaos. After lighting the fuse, he walked calmly to a getaway car, a beat-up yellow Mercury Marquis, parked a few blocks away. He drove north out of Oklahoma City, heading toward Kansas on Interstate 35. Just 90 minutes later, at 10:17 a.m., his plan nearly unraveled. Oklahoma State Trooper Charlie Hanger pulled him over near Perry, Oklahoma, 60 miles from the bombing site, for a missing license plate. McVeigh, cool and polite, wore a loaded Glock under his jacket, but Hanger noticed a bulge and arrested him for carrying a concealed weapon. Unaware of the bombing connection, Hanger booked him into the Noble County Jail. For 2 days, McVeigh sat in a cell, watching news reports of the bombing on a jail TV, his expression blank. He called himself a political prisoner to inmates, hinting at his motives but revealing nothing specific. On April 21st, as the FBI traced the Ryder truck's axle to Junction City and linked it to McVeigh's alias, agents descended on the jail. Just hours before his scheduled release on the gun charge, he was transferred to federal custody. What was he thinking as the net closed in? Did he feel triumph, regret, or nothing at all? Timothy James McVeigh, when first confronted by authorities, didn't offer a detailed alibi to distance himself from the Oklahoma City bombing on April 19, 1995. Instead, he played it cool, almost eerily detached, as if he'd rehearsed the moment. He told State Trooper Charlie Hanger he was traveling from Arkansas to Kansas, a vague story about visiting friends. When Hanger spotted a concealed Glock under McVeigh's jacket, he was booked on gun charges not yet linked to the bombing. In the Noble County Jail, McVeigh stayed silent about the attack, even as news of the 168 deaths flooded the TV. His initial defense wasn't a formal alibi, but a calculated refusal to engage, hinting he was a political prisoner without admitting guilt. What was he hiding behind that calm facade? The FBI unraveled his non-story swiftly. By April 21, 1995, investigators traced the Ryder truck's axle, found in the bombing debris, to a rental agency in Junction City, Kansas. Employees identified McVeigh as the man who rented the truck under the alias Robert Kling Motel. Records from the Dreamland Motel in Junction City placed him there days before the bombing, and a sketch based on witness descriptions matched his face. Receipts for ammonium nitrate purchases, linked to storage units he rented, piled up as damning evidence. His fingerprints were found on a fertilizer bag and a cannon fuse. Most chillingly, a business card in his wallet, recovered during the arrest, had handwritten notes about explosives in the phrase, "TNT at $5 per stick, need more." His vague travel excuse collapsed under the weight of this forensic trail. Why hadn't he covered his tracks better? The trial began on April 24, 1997, in a federal courthouse in Denver, Colorado, moved from Oklahoma to ensure an impartial jury. McVeigh faced an 11-count federal indictment, including conspiracy, use of a weapon of mass destruction, and first-degree murder for the deaths of 8 federal employees. Prosecutors, led by Joseph Hartzler, painted McVeigh as a cold-blooded terrorist driven by anti-government rage, fueled by the Waco siege and Ruby Ridge. They presented a mountain of evidence, 700 witnesses, surveillance footage of the Ryder truck, and chemical residue on McVeigh's clothes matching the bomb's components. A key moment came when survivor testimony, like that of Dana Bradley, who lost her mother and 2 children in the blast, brought jurors to tears, underscoring the human cost of McVeigh's actions. The prosecution also introduced letters McVeigh wrote to his sister Jennifer, boasting of something big before the bombing, proving premeditation. Could his defense possibly counter this? McVeigh's lead attorney, Stephen Jones, didn't deny the bombing, but argued McVeigh wasn't the mastermind. The defense suggested a broader conspiracy, pointing to John Doe number 2, a supposed accomplice described by some witnesses but never identified. They claimed the government rushed to pin the crime solely on McVeigh to cover up its own failures at Waco. This theory fizzled. Witnesses were inconsistent, and no credible evidence of another bomber emerged. Jones also tried to humanize McVeigh, portraying him as a Gulf War veteran disillusioned by a corrupt government. But this backfired as jurors saw his lack of remorse. McVeigh himself undermined the defense, privately admitting to his lawyers he acted alone and saw the bombing as a revolutionary act. Why would he sabotage his own case? The trial's most gripping moment came during closing arguments on May 29, 1997. Prosecutors displayed photos of the 19 children killed, including 1-year-old Bailey Allman, forcing jurors to confront the carnage. The defense's plea for mercy fell flat against McVeigh's own writings, where he called the children collateral damage. After 23 hours of deliberation, on June 2, 1997, the jury delivered a unanimous guilty verdict on all 11 counts. The courtroom was silent, the weight of justice palpable. Would McVeigh finally show regret? The sentencing phase began June 4, 1997. Prosecutors pushed for the death penalty, presenting heart-wrenching victim impact statements. Helena Garrett, whose 16-month-old son Tevin died in the daycare, described cradling his body, a testimony that left jurors sobbing. The defense offered mitigating factors: McVeigh's military service, his belief in a tyrannical government, but it rang hollow. On June 13, 1997, the jury sentenced McVeigh to death by lethal injection. As the verdict was read, he stared blankly, unbowed. Was this the ending he wanted all along? After his sentencing on June 13, 1997, Timothy James McVeigh was sent to the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, a maximum security federal prison housing the nation's only federal death row for men. The Special Confinement Unit, a sterile, isolated wing, became his world for the next 4 years. Death row was a place of stark routine and crushing solitude. 23 hours a day in an 8 by 10-foot cell, with a concrete bed, a stainless steel sink toilet combo, and a small window offering a sliver of sky. The fluorescent lights buzzed constantly, and the air carried the faint hum of despair from other inmates. For McVeigh, convicted of the Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people, including 19 children, this was both punishment and stage. How would a man who saw himself as a revolutionary survive in such a cage? McVeigh's behavior on death row was a mix of defiance and calculation. He spent his days reading voraciously, books on history, politics, and even the Turner Diaries, the extremist novel that fueled his ideology. He wrote letters to supporters, journalists, and his family, carefully crafting his image as a martyr for liberty. In one letter to a reporter, he described the bombing as a necessary evil to spark a revolt against a tyrannical government, showing no trace of remorse for the lives lost. To guards, he was polite but distant, never causing trouble but always carrying an air of superiority as if he were above the system. He befriended a few inmates, including Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, with whom he traded stories of their anti-government crusades during their 1-hour daily recreation in separate outdoor cages. But did he ever question his actions in the quiet of his cell? McVeigh rejected religion, dismissing chaplains' visits with a smirk, calling faith a crutch. He pursued appeals, but not with the desperation of a man fighting for life. His legal team filed motions challenging the trial's fairness, arguing the media frenzy and government's rush to judgment tainted the jury. These efforts dragged on but gained little traction. The evidence, fingerprints, receipts, witness testimony, was overwhelming. In 2000, a federal appeals court upheld his conviction, and the Supreme Court declined to hear his case. McVeigh seemed almost relieved, later telling his attorneys he was ready to end this. Was he embracing death as the final act of his twisted mission? The prison environment weighed heavily. Guards described death row as a place where hope eroded, with inmates pacing cells or shouting to each other through vents. McVeigh, though, stayed composed, even joking about his fate. He once told a guard, "I'll be out of here one way or another." Yet the isolation took a subtle toll. His letters grew sharper, his tone more bitter as execution loomed. He refused counseling, insisting he had no regrets. The families of his victims, meanwhile, grappled with their grief, some praying for his death, others hoping for a sign of remorse that never came. Could a man so resolute in his beliefs ever break? On June 11, 2001, the day of his execution, McVeigh woke early in his cell on Terre Haute's death row. The morning was quiet, the prison locked down as the hour approached. At 5 a.m., guards offered him a final meal, but McVeigh requested only 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream, which he ate slowly, savoring each bite. He spent the morning alone, declining visits from family or his attorneys, though his legal team had met with him the day before. No spiritual advisors came. McVeigh had no use for them. Instead, he wrote a final statement, copying by hand the 1875 poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley, with its defiant lines, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." What did those words mean to a man facing death for such a monstrous act? At 7 a.m. Central Time, guards escorted McVeigh from his cell to the execution chamber, a small clinical room with a gurney and a one-way glass window for witnesses. He wore a khaki shirt and pants, his face pale but expressionless. Strapped to the gurney, he was surrounded by a team of U.S. Marshals and prison officials. The execution method was lethal injection, a three-drug protocol, sodium thiopental to sedate, pancuronium bromide to paralyze, and potassium chloride to stop the heart. Witnesses, 10 victims' family members, 10 media representatives, and 4 of McVeigh's chosen observers, sat in silence behind the glass. Among them was Paul Howell, whose daughter Karan was killed in the bombing. McVeigh made eye contact with the witnesses, his gaze steady, offering no apology. His last words were not spoken, but written in the Invictus poem he handed to the warden. Did he truly feel no regret, even in his final moments? At 7:14 a.m., the first drug flowed through the IV. McVeigh's breathing slowed, his eyes fluttered shut, and his body went still. At 7:21 a.m., he was pronounced dead, the process swift and clinical. The witnesses filed out, some in tears, others numb. For victims' families like Helena Garrett, who lost her toddler son Tevin, the moment brought closure, but no healing. Outside, a crowd gathered, some cheering, others praying, as the nation absorbed the end of a dark chapter. McVeigh's body was cremated, his ashes scattered in an undisclosed location to prevent a martyr's shrine. Timothy McVeigh's execution closed a wound, but left scars that linger. His unrepentant stance and the scale of his crime, forcing a nation to mourn 168 lives, raise haunting questions about justice and vengeance. Did his death bring true closure for the victims' families, or does the shadow of his ideology still loom over us? Share your thoughts below and hit that notification bell so you don't miss another chilling story.